Joining us now to dive into what this all means is Josh Kraushaar. He's editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider, a longtime political reporter. He joins us on the phone. Josh, good to talk to you, sir.
Hey, Vince. Great to be back with you.
So another good survey for President Trump in the swing states, this seems to be the direction the trend is going, don't you think?
Well, there really is no trend at all. Trump has had the lead, Vince, almost for months and months and months. We haven't seen a really significant critical mass of polls showing Biden ahead for quite some time. And this series of New York Times polls really does a deep dive into the big battleground states and has really some eye-popping numbers, from Biden trailing by double digits in Nevada. The last time a Republican won the state of Nevada in a presidential election, we have to go back to 2004. He's up by nearly double digits in Georgia, Arizona lead. I think it's really coming down to, when you look at all the data, that's coming down to those three Midwestern states or Rust Belt states, where Biden is down, or I think he's up by a couple in Wisconsin and then losing in Pennsylvania and Michigan. And it's really going to come down to whether Biden can run the table in those Midwestern blue-collar states where he's trailing but still is in the game, whereas a lot of the other battleground states, it's a lot of trouble. Trump is dominating, really, in all the other battlegrounds.
The Trump campaign, according to its pollster, Tony Fabrizio, reported by Mark Caputo this past week, says that Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are the only true toss-ups right now. Do you think that's right?
Yeah. I mean, look, when you do the map, I think Nevada is a weird state. I don't think, based on my conversations with the campaigns, that Biden is down by that much in Nevada, but I think Nevada is moving in the Republicans' direction. But I think if you do the math, if you go out and put up a map and look at the Electoral College, I think you have to push Arizona and Georgia into the Republican direction. These are states that were traditionally Republican for quite some time. Biden, big upset in both in 2020. But a lot of the Republicans are coming home. They're dissatisfied with Joe Biden. And one thing that the New York Times polls found, and I think it's consistent with other data we've seen, is that Trump is making some pretty notable inroads with Hispanic voters in Arizona, with Nevada as well, where there's a large Hispanic constituency. And he's making inroads with African-American voters in Georgia. Not huge gains, but enough to really move the needle politically in those Sun Belt states, southern states. So I think when you look at the math and you look at the data, I mean, again, it's coming down to the three Midwestern states. And if Biden can win Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and the New York Times poll did show him winning Wisconsin in their survey, if he can run the table in those three states, then he can there's a path to 270 for him to win the election. But it's looking like Arizona's out of reach. It's looking like Georgia's becoming really, really tough for Biden. And that means that essentially the White House might have to run an inside straight in three states that are still pretty tough for the president.
So I was digging through the crosstabs this morning, like so many people in politics do, to see what we could suss out. And something, an interesting phenomenon inside of this poll, which I think is reflected in other surveys too, is that Trump is unique in the Republican Party. Trump is doing amazing things in the polls. Biden is lagging big time behind him. But if you look at the Senate races in these swing states, the Democrats are in the lead in all of them. The Democrats in fact, if you combine all of the survey results from Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, the Democrats lead the Republican candidates 45-40. Why is that, Josh Kraushaar?
Well, let me give you the sort of kind of in the numbers answer, which is that I don't know if the numbers are that good for Democrats. When you're all those races except for Arizona, you have a sitting Democratic senator who everyone knows, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. Arizona is the only state where you have an open contest. And if you're an incumbent senator and people know who you are, and you're not at 50%, that's usually a sign that at the very least this is going to be a very competitive race. The challengers in all those contests are not well known. When you look at the data, the incumbents are very well known. So, look, I look at a number like what Nevada is a good example with Senator Jackie Rosen. If you believe the numbers in the New York Times poll, she's winning 40-38%. Well, if I'm looking at those numbers and I'm Jackie Rosen's campaign, being a well-known senator and only getting 40% of the vote is a big red flag. And it's not. And I actually compare the Democratic senators' numbers with Joe Biden's numbers, and they're not all that different, frankly. Maybe a little bit higher overall, but it's really a result of the challengers just not running campaigns yet, and no one knows who they are in many cases. So I don't agree that the down ballot looks bad for Republicans. I think it's pretty consistent with what would be a good Republican night if Trump wins the election and he wins those states where he's leading. I think he will have coattails and probably bring some of those Republican Senate candidates on board. I will say Arizona, the numbers, when you have an open race, and actually people know who Carrie Lake is more than they know who the Democrat running in that Senate race is. And Carrie Lake, if you talk to Republicans in Washington, they're very worried about Carrie Lake and her low favorability numbers. So I think the one state where Republicans do have a down ballot problem is that Arizona Senate race, and I think that's a state that they're going to worry about.
It's kind of interesting. Oh, well, that's a good explanation. Because I'm looking at these numbers and I'm thinking, man, how is that possible? You got these Republicans trailing these Democrats all over the place, and the answer that I'm sitting with is, well, in some sense, the right has successfully defined Biden. They've looked at Biden's presidency, they've looked at the chaos around us, and they've said that's his fault. Trump stands up there before and after the trial each day and says, this is a Biden operation. And I think a lot of Americans have taken that message and gone, yeah, Biden needs to be held accountable for all of this. But I wonder to what extent the Democrat Party broadly owns responsibility for kind of the negative feelings that people have about the state of the country.
That's right, Vince. I mean, these days there's not many candidates. Joe Manchin, when he was running, he's not running for re-election, but he's one of the few people who could actually run ahead of the ticket. You don't have many senators or any lawmakers, for that matter, who can really run ahead of where Biden is. And Biden's brand is bringing down a whole lot of Democrats. If you look at the data, I mean, I look at that data. I draw. Look, I think some Democrats are in better shape than other Democrats, but I look at those folks under 50%, and they're being dragged down by the top of the ticket. So, I do think if you're, Bob Casey's got a big name in Pennsylvania. Maybe he can run a couple points ahead of Biden in that state. Maybe, you have a similar dynamic in a few other. Tammy Baldwin seems to be doing pretty well in Wisconsin. But I do think it's much more likely that when those campaigns begin and you have these Republican challengers tagging Democrats as part of the Biden agenda, talking about issues that are the economy, immigration, the Middle East, and the divisions within the party over support of Israel. I mean, those are issues that you're going to have these lawmakers get into the same problems as Biden is dealing with right now.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're going to see a huge disconnect if Trump wins by a few points. I think he's going to bring in a lot of Republican senators with him to office.
I don't know your thought on this, so I'll ask you. But do you envision a scenario where Joe Biden steps down as the party's nominee ahead of Election Day?
I don't at this point. I mean, that would be a recipe for chaos, and it's hard to see a successful party having to switch up their nominee at this late stage. That said, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, Vince, in the past, but at 81 years old, there's always risk of a health concern that could come up. Hopefully not, but
right.
I think that is a real possibility when you're at that age and you're dealing with a lot of age-related concerns in that sense.
Right. Yeah. Because I just again, you look at these numbers and you got to believe the Democrats start seeing the writing on the wall and they think, okay, we've got a couple months to go. What can we do? One of the answers would be to replace the nominee and to try and convince the voters in their party that it was a legitimate exercise of power to say we just need somebody else. And health concerns, man, you could cook pretextual health concerns up in a second. And of course, he's got all sorts of health concerns to begin with.
Well, the other problem, even if you can play some fantasy politics and get a sense of who else could succeed Biden, I have a hard time if that scenario played itself out. It would be hard to get anyone other than Kamala Harris as his replacement. Or if you didn't do that, it would piss off a whole lot of Democrats in the party that would divide the party even further. So yeah. I just don't think that. Look, if you were the Biden campaign and you saw this coming a year ago, you would probably switch your running mate, maybe give Kamala Harris another good position in the cabinet, or another top job, and get a running mate that has more credibility with a broader sway of the American public, and then maybe you can do it. Maybe you step aside. Maybe you have a succession plan. But they didn't plan, and they're really dealing with the ramifications of that right now. Right,
and as you and I both know, the Democrats, and you already mentioned it, Democrats, their problems aren't just Biden. Biden's not the only problem. They've got a big fight within their own party right now about whether or not they're going to stand in support of Israel at all, and it's causing a tremendous number of rifts. In fact, I know that over at your website, Jewish Insider, Emily Jacobs has a piece today, headline, Jewish Democrats concerned over Maryland's Democratic Party's leftward tilt. Tell us what's going on in Maryland and why are Jewish Democrats concerned there?
Yeah, well, we got a big primary coming up tomorrow in Maryland, and a lot of pro-Israel Jewish Democrats are shocked at their soon-to-be senior senator, Chris Van Hollen, who has, frankly, along with Bernie Sanders, probably emerged as one of the most anti-Israel voices in the United States Senate, which is something of a new phenomenon. It's he's not always held the positions and the criticism of Israel that he's had in the last couple of years. And a lot of Jewish voters, after trying to kind of have meetings with Van Hollen, work with him behind the scenes, are just exasperated. He goes on television, really, accuses Israel of committing war crimes, doesn't seem to acknowledge that they're in a fight for their existence, a fight for their safety against Hamas. And even when it comes to, I was actually watching him on CBS News this weekend on Face the Nation, and he was asked about Hillary Clinton's comments about the camp protesters against Israel, who are naive and don't know much about history, and he actually defended the protesters. So, I mean, he's really on every issue, certainly on Israel, the Middle East, foreign policy, but increasingly on anti-Semitism as well, turned out to be a sort of an unreliable ally, or gone from an ally to even an enemy in some cases. And a lot of Jewish voters with a big Senate race, Larry Hogan running as the Republican nominee, is someone that has won Jewish voters' support before. There's a real chance that Democrats may lose a large share of the Jewish vote in that Senate race with Hogan, and we'll see who the Democratic nominee is after Tuesday. But there's a lot of real concern that in a state that has long had lawmakers, Ben Cardin, the retiring senator, and a lot of the lawmakers in Congress on the Democratic side have been reliable supporters of Israel. And Van Hollen right now sticking out like a sore thumb, with sounding more like Bernie Sanders than he is anyone else in the delegation.
And in that Senate primary between Angela Alsobrooks and David Trone, both of them have been fairly critical of Israel as well, correct?
Well, what's interesting, and this is where if you look at the story, Van Hollen may be having an impact on some of his more junior colleagues, because usually it was pretty good politics in Maryland, and it's good politics generally to be in support of Israel over Hamas, right? That's pretty. You look at the polls and you see the overwhelming support when you lay it out in those terms. But what's interesting is that Trone has been a very reliable supporter of Israel, but he's kind of, he's been a little softer on the campaign trail. And also Brooks gave an interview to the Washington Post this past week supporting Biden's argument to essentially condition offensive aid if they go into Rafah, which is a position that Biden embraced, is one that a lot of pro-Israel Democrats have had real problems with, including Senator Cardin, who did not support that position from the president. So there's a lot of divisions within the Democratic Party, but I would say if you look at who's on the most leftward critical of Israel stance, it's Bernie Sanders and it's Chris Van Hollen, and that's having a lot of Democrats that are pro-Israel very worried in the state of Maryland.
All right. Josh Kraushaar, editor-in-chief over at Jewish Insider. Sir, so good to talk to you as always. Thank you for your time today.